I recruit for the folks who are doing a lot of the, AI is all the talk right now, the big buzz. So a lot of the engineers doing the hands-on work for Google Cloud specifically.
Every hiring is an investment. We look at investment at two main parts. What is the risk versus the reward? And I think a lot about that because I think a lot of job seekers might make the mistake of applying for jobs where they're overqualified or applying for jobs where they're massively underqualified.
The hardest thing about job searching is there's no one size fits all approach, right? If it was, there wouldn't be career coaches or people paying other folks to help them.
If you remember that your recruiter is human, they're going to remember that you're human who wants a job.
The most important thing a job seeker can do is
Welcome back to another episode of the How to Get a Job podcast. And today we're going to be speaking with a technical recruiter and career coach with over 12 years of recruiting experience, recruiting at some of the world's top companies. And we're super excited to talk about how recruiting is in 2025. Nicky Slavich, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We've been practicing. I've been practicing the last time and I even messed it up, but super excited that you're here, Nicky.
No, I think you got it better than 90% of people, Daniel. So well done. It's really nice to be here with you and Ellie, and I'm just excited to hopefully say something valuable. You know, my go-to joke is that if I talk for long enough, there may be a lot of noise, but maybe something in there is helpful. So I hope this is a good version of that. So thank you for having me. It's a joy to be here.
No, I am excited that you're here, and I'm pretty confident that what might seem like common knowledge to you is not common practice for most of the listeners here. I'm pretty confident that if someone is listening to this, 99.9% of the time, you have way more recruiting, HR experience, understand the job market better than the job seekers that are doing it. And you see, I would say, thousands of resumes and every year, if not more than 10,000 of resumes. So there's no way that someone listens to this and doesn't walk away with at least one takeaway.
Yes, I hope so. That's the goal. So thank you again, and we'll get rolling. You tell me where to go.
Yeah, perfect. Nicky, I'll get us started if that's all right. When I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, I was noticing that you do have a lot of recruiting experience, like Daniel said. I'd love for you to give our listeners some context and describe your role a little bit more. Are you a resume reviewer, an interviewer? Do you go out and find people? Do you do all of the things? What's your primary responsibility?
Yeah, great question, Ellie. And just to make sure, you like how I clarify the question like a good interviewer, you want to know about my current role at Google, or like all my experience, or what I'm doing most recently? Would that be helpful?
Primarily just for giving folks context as to what you do. Yep. So your role as a recruiter, as it stands currently.
Yeah, as it is currently. Great question. Yes, like Daniel said, in total, about 12 years of recruiting experience, very high level. I started at the university level. So I was recruiting students to the university, and then worked in student affairs from there. Before my current role as a technical recruiter at Google, I was an in-house recruiter at a corporate real estate firm in Los Angeles. So I'm based in LA, just outside of the city, and I was an internal recruiter, which means I was hired by the company to hire people for the company. And the reason why I say that is I'm actually still an internal recruiter for Google currently. A lot of people ask me, I'm like, oh, I recruit for Google. They're like, oh, great, what company? I'm like, Google, that's my employer. And so in general, there's two different types of recruiters. There's in-house recruiters who are hired by the company to recruit for the company. And then there's agency recruiters, right, who recruit for a bunch of different companies and get commission. That is not the recruiting I have done. And so what I do right now as an employee of Google proper is I recruit in Google Cloud for their AI and ML division. And when I say AI and ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning, specifically for mid to senior level engineers and engineering managers. So the easiest way to put it is, Google is a huge company, 180,000 people. Google Cloud is a big chunk of that, about a third or a fourth of that 180,000 people. And I recruit for the folks who are doing a lot of the, AI is all the talk right now, the big buzz. So a lot of the engineers doing the hands-on work for Google Cloud specifically, folks usually with 15 to 20 years of experience. And to answer your question even more directly, Ellie, like I spend a lot of time finding candidates, reaching out to candidates, and talking to candidates, right? And so you would think, when I tell people I'm a recruiter for Google, oh, you just must get thousands of applications all day, every day, like the best candidates show up to you, which that has happened. But the roles I recruit for and a lot of technical roles at a company like Google are very specific, very niche. And typically these folks have been doing the work for 15, 20 plus years and are maybe really happy in their role and aren't looking to leave. So a lot of the work I do is actually what we call active sourcing, active reach outs. And so I will reach out to folks who have the profile, get on the phone with them, good conversation, positive match for the role, pass them on to the hiring manager. And then the process continues from there, which I'm happy to talk about. But in short, a lot of my work revolves around reaching out to candidates, talking to them, getting them to the next stage in the process, as well as more like recruiting forecasting and reporting on like, here are hiring trends within cloud. Here are the hires we've made as an org this year. Some of the more, boring reporting technical stuff that has to be done for the higher up recruiter leadership team. So that is hopefully a helpful snapshot, and I'm happy to dive into any of that more if helpful.
I want to dive into, maybe it's not so much diving into, but when I think about recruiting, right, I think about a company has 4 main ways to acquire talent, right? The first way, and this is how I prioritize it. Would love to hear if you have a different way of organizing this priority, and kind of like we could talk about this, because I think it's a good way. This is kind of like how I would always teach our job seekers. Like when a company has an open role, whether because they're adding headcount, because the team is growing, or because someone left, because they got promoted, they quit, got fired for whatever reason, right? You first, I would say, in the decision-making tree, it's like, is there an internal candidate that we can bring up to this role, right? And every company is very different. Some prefer internals more than others, but so internal. Then to me, I think the second, if I'm a hiring manager, I go, do I have referrals? People in my current team that are good, or people in my team that know what is required to be successful in the role? Can I get referrals from them to fill the role?
Yeah.
Third, I think about posting this online and get inbound people apply for the role. So it could be on LinkedIn, the Google Jobs itself, whatever it is, right? And then fourth is outreach. And when I think about outreach, you have external agencies, and then internal recruiters to do that. Do you see it the same way, or is there a different way that companies get candidates?
No, I mean, maybe you should be a recruiter and quit your day job, Daniel, because that was a really good breakdown of how we find candidates. Honestly, I as you're talking, I mean, the only other thing I could really add to that, which isn't my focus now, is maybe like events, or like when I was a university recruiter, we'd go to like college, high school fairs, and that's where you get like a big bulk of folks at like an expo, a conference. I don't do a lot of that in my day-to-day. Pretty much my day-to-day consists of exactly what you just described. And especially like a multi-thousand person company, the internal mobility, kind of like, are there any internal folks who could do it? The internal mobility climate is extremely competitive, typically at a company as well. And so just to pause on that point, job seekers often think like, oh, I applied, I didn't hear anything. I applied and I got auto rejected. And a lot of times it's because they did nothing wrong. It's a lot of times because there's like an all-star waiting in the wings, either getting promoted or coming from a different division or, somewhere else within the company. Not to mention the other parts that you brought up as well. So in short, I would say that is a very accurate snapshot. And I've done all of it. My previous role, I would get a bunch of applications for, let's say, like a marketing specialist, a marketing manager. And there's some really qualified folks. We pick the top 5, we interview the top 3, the top 1 gets the job. I'm oversimplifying, but you apply, you screen, you interview, you hire. And that still does happen at a company like Google and other big tech companies, of course. But for my role, and specifically Google is so siloed, meaning like my last company, I wore a lot of hats and it was do a lot of these things, but not very deep. In my current role, it's like, here's a really, really deep dive, but like, this is your lane. And so my lane is to find really niche specialized talent for like very unique AI ML skill sets. And so to your point, and those 4 different umbrellas, if you will, a lot of my time is spent on like the sourcing outreach. And we have great sourcing partners. Sometimes we'll like, tag team profiles, or say you divide this half of candidates, I divide this half. But in short, that's a really great way. And just gives you further credibility, because clearly that's a great way to think about it.
Well, I was kind of like wanted to use it as a leading question of to say like if you had to give a percentage, and I understand this would change dramatically based on is it early professional, middle professional, and late professional, right? Because like it is kind of like essentially like a pyramid, and so it becomes harder to find. Uh, but what would you say for somebody 10, 15 years in a tech role position? Where would you, if guesstimate? I don't. We're not going to hold you accountable to this percentage. What percentage of candidate like roles are filled internally? What percent of roles are filled through a referral? What percentage of roles are filled because of inbound, which is anything that's like career fairs, posting online, or like, people are applying to get in? Or what percent of roles are filled through a recruiter messaging someone, whether it's internal or an external recruiter?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the short answer is it varies, which is always annoying. Or, someone says it depends. It's like a very political response, but it's the absolute truth. And what I would also say is it depends simply because of the job profile and, like you said, the years of experience. So let's just use a big tech company. There's a huge difference between an entry-level salesperson versus an engineering director with 25 years of experience leading 3,000 people. Like, that the second type of role is going to be a very proactive search where, yes, you could get applicants, but you are pretty much guaranteed to be poaching those folks from competitor companies, messaging them, wining and dining, a little bit more of like, hey, you're not going to get the perfect candidate on a gold platter, right? Whereas the first example of, hey, an entry level or even mid-career, let's just use me, like a recruiter, like, yes, you can go find them and source them and like reach out, but you're probably going to get a lot of qualified applicants who apply directly. So I say that because for my world specifically, Daniel, like, again, grain of salt estimating, like definitely over half. I mean, it's got to be 60 to 80% of folks who we are like proactively reaching out to, which is always a good plug to have updated LinkedIn profile, updated social accounts. We don't go on Instagram or anything like that, but if there's any professional outlet other than LinkedIn, so like for recruiting, GitHub and other technical platforms, always have that updated because that's how we'll find folks. Referrals, I don't have a percentage, but are a substantial amount. And then internal mobility is pretty significant for the roles I recruit for as well, and say, hey, they're doing the same exact work in YouTube. They're doing the same exact work in Google search or whatever it is. So I don't have percentages for each category, but I will say the vast majority is outbound, targeting candidates, that fourth bucket that you've provided for my roles specifically. And I think this might be a little bit bold because I've never recruited for these roles at my current company, but it would maybe even be reverse for someone who's doing more like entry to mid-level roles that aren't technical. That's not to downplay. That's not to say, oh, these roles are more important. I hope no one would interpret it like that. It's just to say the more niche and specified the skill set, the more refined the search versus, again, self-deprecating here, because if someone posted a mid-level recruiter role, like hopefully I would stand out as a great applicant, but like they're probably going to get a ton of qualified candidates from that job posting itself. So that's why I say it depends. And that's a little bit of insight into my world, but also more context on other job profiles, years of experience, and types of roles, if that makes sense.
What I would like to follow, Ellie, I know you have something there. I have one more follow up, and you can have
go ahead. Go ahead, Daniel.
Sorry, because I think this is really interesting because I would bet that the average person that's looking to break into big tech, right, will assume that they need to apply for jobs. And if you even look at a job from big tech, and even like LinkedIn, it says like, I've had this many applicants in this many days, like the role's been open for this many days, had this many applicants, it would be like completely overwhelmed by that. And then to the fact that you hear that the majority come from either referrals or outbound, it's like mind blowing, and you just don't expect that answer. But it is the reality. And I don't know. I mean, I do know what this is, but I think it is important. Like most really great employees are working for someone else, and it's like the reason why I think agencies are used so often is because of you're stealing top talent, to the point that I just read an article that Mark Zuckerberg is out there recruiting and personally recruiting people for their AI business and paying 9-figure salaries, which is crazy. You have the CEO of Meta, is their number one recruiter of talent. And that's like so important. Maybe that wasn't a question, Ellie. You could take it over. That was kind of like a statement that's like really mind-blowing, because I always seem to like I forget, like I always like forget like how important it is to have a a personal brand. Like you don't have to post every day or have a newsletter, but that does help. Like it does help to give more context about your background and what you're working on, your passion, and creating yourself like a subject matter expert, especially the nicher you get, like those, they're going to find you. They're going to find you if you put yourself out there. But
Yeah, that's almost precisely what I was going to say. I was thinking really the kind of main takeaway for our listeners who are job seekers is the more specialized your role is, the more you need to lean on having a personal brand on whether it's LinkedIn or like you even mentioned GitHub, versus if you're at more of the entry level. I'm sure that the personal brand could absolutely support you, but you also can get a job through applying online.
Totally.
I think that there's maybe misconceptions from job seekers of what it means to have a personal brand. And I would love for maybe you, Nicky, to elaborate on when you are reaching out to people who are in these specialized fields and they have their profile up to date. And I'm also sure that you help job seekers with this too, because you're also a career coach. What are the kind of things that, one, you're looking for as a recruiter? And then two, what does that mean for the job seeker? What should they implement into their profile or their GitHub or their brand or their story to be more attractive and then thus more likely to get an outreach from a recruiter?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think the hardest thing about job searching, just kind of a side note before I address that specific question, and it's related to what we're talking about, is the hardest thing about job searching is there's no one size fits all approach, right? If it was, there wouldn't be career coaches or people paying other folks to help them, because it's really complex, nuanced, and hard. It just straight up is. Like, there's so many ways people get jobs. There's so many ways there's even more ways people don't get jobs. And so it's like anything. Like if you want something, then you have to take a strategic and nuanced approach to get there. So with Daniel's really helpful 4 buckets, like even within those are sub buckets and like other things that happen. And so you compound all those things and compile it together. It's a lot of different ways that the pie can get sliced. So all that to say, job seekers, it is a grind and it is challenging. So affirming that. But for your question, Ellie, I would say that the most important thing a job seeker can do is highlight their relevance to the role and highlight their impact. And you hear these buzzwords all the time, but let me just take a second as a recruiter to dive a little bit deeper on that. When I say highlight your relevance to the role, I think one big misconception in the job search is that, there's a lot of services, I've even done this for friends, where you have someone review your resume, even like a paid service, and that can be really helpful. It can be extremely helpful. But often what people think about with a resume or an application is, I polished myself so perfectly as a candidate, and now I'm out in the wild applying to roles. Where the best thing you can do, and this is true for LinkedIn, for a brand, for anything online, is say, well, what is your specific expertise and why is that relevant to the roles you're applying for? That's a lot easier to do on a resume versus a LinkedIn profile. You're not going to change your LinkedIn profile every single time you apply to different roles. I get it. But you do want to be strategic in the content you have on there to make sure it is relevant. So when I do a LinkedIn search, right, my job, as much as I love doing this for friends, is like talk through their dream job and help them out. And maybe we'll talk about that. But putting on my recruiter hat, like I'm trying to find the most qualified person for the role. And because of that, I need to find the most like the skill sets, the expertise, the years of experience. Maybe there's like specific databases or like languages for software engineers they need to be comfortable in. Whatever the criteria is, that's what I'm looking for when I say job relevance and criteria for the role. But I was just talking with a friend last week, and he applied to a really competitive, like great role, good jump in his career. And he had a great resume, but the one thing he was missing was, this is what the job posting is wanting, but you're not showing how you have made the impact in your current role. So it's not just enough to say worked cross-functionally with, diverse partners or whatever it is. That's great. That's maybe what the job posting says. But okay, not only did you do that, but then and he works in sales, your account grew by 25% year over year because of the work you did. So in short, hopefully that's helpful context, but it's relevance to the role, and relevance, maybe if you're not applying or you're building a brand, to your question, Ellie, just like relevance for what you want to be known for, and getting, I know people say niche all the time, but like just kind of specific in who you are as a job seeker. And then the second part of that is making sure that you highlight the impact that you specifically have. Like okay, great, you did all these things. Why was it different? What's like the measurable result because you were in that role? Hopefully that's a helpful takeaway. And you can do that on a LinkedIn profile. That's like really direct advice, I think, for a resume. Doesn't make it easy. You have to like think about that and sometimes like work through, well, what was my impact and what were the measurable results? And sometimes you wish it was more. And it's there. Like you can always get a little bit creative, but showing that is going to jump out to a recruiter to say, oh, good, they're doing the thing. Oh, wow, they're actually doing the thing really well. It's kind of that two-side coin, if that makes sense.
Nicky, you're saying about like showing the value, right? When I think about like hiring, I think about it that every company has limited resources. And because every company has limited resources, Google, the US government, right? They can't go and hire every engineer and therefore beat out the competition because they brought out the talent. So they have to be selective on who they hire.
Sure.
And there's a budget and there's a return on investment. And so if we understand that every company has limited resources and every time they are hiring someone, they're making an investment decision saying, if I am going to pay this engineer $250,000, I can't use that money for ads. I can't use that money for a new headquarters. I can't use that money for anything else. Right.
Yeah.
And if we understand that every hiring is an investment, we look at investment at two main parts. What is the risk versus the reward? And I think a lot about that because I think a lot of job seekers might make the mistake of applying for jobs where they're overqualified or applying for jobs where they're massively underqualified. So if you're overqualified, then you might be able to deliver great results, but the odds of you being there long enough for the company to generate their return on investment is very low because you're just using it as a stepping stone and vice versa.
Right.
I'm wondering if you agree with that. I'm wondering, how do you suggest job seekers how do they find the right job to apply where they're not too qualified or too underqualified?
Yeah. And I would agree with a lot of that. Like everything, and I feel like this way about life. Everything's a trade-off, right? You really have to look at the ROI, which can sound really like business and metric driven, but really it's just like, we do it all the time. Like what's the ROI of me ending work early and spending time with my kids? What's the ROI of applying to 100 jobs on the easy apply button through LinkedIn versus 10 jobs that are more strategic with a targeted resume? Like you can apply that to anything. So yes, there are always trade-offs in an ROI and a cost benefit analysis. And with that, like, which I would agree with, like the overqualified versus underqualified, not every job has this. And I have a biased lens through my current company, I think in a good way, but I think it's important to look at minimum versus preferred qualifications. Usually that's a pretty good indication of if it is saying, and sometimes a job won't have both, but sometimes it will say minimum qualifications. Sometimes it'll say qualifications. Sometimes it'll say preferred. Ideally, it says both, right? Hey, you need 3 years of experience let's just use recruiting. You need 3 years of experience in recruiting, but if I want to be a recruiting manager, which I'm not right now, ideally, you have 6 years plus 2 years of managerial experience or whatever it is. It's like, okay, that's kind of a stretch. I definitely meet the first one. I don't quite meet the second one. And people have different percentages on like, you should meet 70% of the qualifications and shoot your shot. You'll never know if you don't apply. And there is truth into that, but you also want to be strategic, right? And so I would say make sure you want to give yourself the best shot that you are hitting the minimum qualifications. If they say, which a good job posting will, you need these to be qualified. I have so many folks who say, yeah, it says 10 years of experience. I have 7. And like, isn't that good enough? It's like in this job market, in this economy, like usually not. Like there's usually someone with 14 years of experience who's applying to the 10 plus years of experience type role. And so I think you have to be a little bit honest with yourself to say, where am I hitting the mark on what's absolutely required and where can I stretch? Again, a good job posting will help clarify that. I think in general, well, it can be both, but I think more recently I've seen folks underselling themselves and saying, well, gosh, I could never do this, or I could never have a job like that. It's like, you probably could. You actually, like, I always tell candidates, you have more experience than you think, you have more skills than you think. It's about how you showcase and polish and address those, which is a whole nother conversation and we can touch on. But I see that way more often than, I think I'm going to be a VP at a big tech company, even though I'm a manager at a mom and pop shop. It's like, yeah, respect, but good luck. That's not going to happen. Right. And I do see that, right? I see folks who say, well, at this 20-person startup, I'm like a VP. Can I be a VP at Google or a big tech company? It's like, yeah, the VPs have 25,000 people under them and are basically running an entire huge company, right?
a Fortune 500 company if it was independent.
There you go.
Right? So,
exactly. Right. And I know that's an extreme example, but I guess I give that example of you kind of have to be self-aware, number one. Number two, you have to be honest with yourself and what you're looking for and like where you do hit the mark. And then if you feel like you're close, and this would be a really big, I think, piece of advice, like you can always caveat of like, you can't lie or fabricate or make up your experience. I hope that's very obvious. But you can get creative with your resume and your application, because at the end of the day, it's a marketing document. Like you're trying to get them on the hook to have a conversation with you to talk about why you may be a good fit. You're not going to say you have 10 years of finance experience if you've had 2 years in sales. You're not going to say you've had 15 years of marketing experience when you're a recruiter like me. That's just like black and white, not true. But you can have some creative liberty in how you position yourself. And so if, full circle to your question, if you feel like you're underqualified, you're overqualified, you don't know what to put, be honest with yourself, give yourself some credit, and use a little bit of creativity to see like where can I, show that, okay, the company calls it this title, I'm at this title, but it actually is very similar, again, with a grain of salt, to give yourself some credit and actually give yourself a shot, because that's what it's all about. So there you go.
Reflecting on my own experience as a recruiter too, that's my background. That's also how I got started in career coaching.
Nice.
Yeah. So there was a lot of lessons that I learned from recruiting that I then took into career coaching. I'm curious if there's maybe a top lesson that you have learned from recruiting that you take into your coaching.
Yeah. Oh, so that's such a fun question, and cool. I did not know you had that recruiting background as well. That's awesome. And yeah, I always, recruiters are like Swiss Army knives, right? They can do so many different things. And now it sounds like I'm being self-congratulatory, but I'm really thinking about like my peers and like the folks I work with who I'm like, gosh, you can like, you're strategic, you're thoughtful, you're empathetic, you are driven. It's everything. The one that, I don't know, this is just the one that jumped out to me. Like my mind naturally went this way while I was understanding your question, is a tip or a trick is like, a door isn't closed. You never know if a door is fully closed, is maybe the best way I'll put it. And maybe like a subcategory of that is like, keep working hard and like keep going. Because the example I have is like, I've had candidates where they've rejected an offer. They reject offer from Google or big tech companies all the time. I've had candidates where they've rejected an offer. I've had candidates who haven't gotten through the interview process. I've had candidates who haven't responded to my first 2 messages. In any one of those messages, or any one of those scenarios, you can be like, well, they failed, they didn't respond, or they rejected the offer, and you're like done and moving on. And me have hired so many candidates where it's like, well, let's have them re-interview a couple months later. And usually a couple months is 6, 9, 12 months. They rejected an offer. See if they like their new company. Like, is the offer still valid? Maybe they haven't responded. What's a 3rd or 4th message going to do? Oh, I never checked LinkedIn. I'm sorry I missed your messages. Like, you just never know a door is fully shut until it becomes overwhelmingly abundant. And at the end of the day, I don't know if you felt this way, Ellie, like recruiting and sales are like 2 peas in a pod, right? Like recruiting basically is sales, and instead of a product, it's people. And instead of, commission, it's, working for the company and like filling a person in a seat. So there are a lot of sales overlap, and maybe people feel this way about sales without getting over like pushy or slimy into the sales like side of things where people like don't take no for an answer. But like there is some sort of like perseverance, grit, circling back that I think can have, back to ROI, a really big ROI if the door is not fully closed. So I don't know if that's the best one. That's just the first one that popped into my head, because I'm like, even some of the recent hires we made, I'm like, I've been working with this dude for like 2 years. This is crazy. But like we got him. And especially in my world where like it's quality over quantity, we don't hire 6 people a week. Like that's just not the type of roles I hire for. So every hire we make is a big deal, and any hire you make at any company is a big deal. But
right.
That's the one that jumped out to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, very good, Nicky. I have really enjoyed this conversation. Daniel, do you have any follow-ups before we wrap up?
Yeah. One last one is kind of related to that. I see one of the biggest mistakes job seekers make is that when they get rejected from a company, they take it so personal, and they feel like they've been rejected for the company for the rest of their life. And one of the things I tell them is like, you didn't even just get rejected. You did not get rejected for the whole company. You probably didn't even get rejected for the role. That there's probably other roles that are there, or not even department, not even the manager. Because many times, especially if you make it all the way to the end, it comes down to just an inch that somebody was a slightly better fit at that point. And a no today doesn't mean a no tomorrow. And I would love to hear your advice, maybe a little bit deeper, on how should people handle their rejection, especially when it's their dream company. And what is the best way to stay in touch with a recruiter like you? Because even though that role wasn't right, 2 years later, it could mean to a yes, right?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And if I could say anything to job seekers, people in between jobs, people looking for a new career, it would literally just be keep going. And that's not trite, and that's not to put a bow on someone's experience. That is literally to say, like, so much of this is a perseverance and a long game. It really, really is. And so to how you handle that is often, I feel like, how you handle any rejection in life. And we talk about this. So I talk about this with my friends, with my wife. I'm starting to talk about this like with our 4-year-old daughter. It's like, you cannot control the circumstances that happen, but you can control how you respond, right? You can't control if a company rejected you. And the reasons we just discussed, there could be 15 reasons why. It's so nuanced, but you can control how you respond. You can control how you adapt. And even my own story, I won't camp out here for too long, but man, I was rejected by Google so many times. Meta, like, actually, I applied through a referral to 3 jobs at Meta, and I got rejected by every single one of them. And I don't know if they still do this, but at the time they had like a rejection,
a cooling off period.
Well, it was just like, I don't even know. It was like a rejection, like, empathy team. It's such a weird way to put it, because he's like, I see you applied for all 3 of these roles, and I see you were rejected. Have you ever considered these types of roles? And it's like, I got rejected from all the ones I applied to. I didn't even know these ones existed. And maybe part of that was because I had a referral, or it was a friend who put a good word in. Sure, we can talk about the power of referrals, or, save that for a future conversation. But the point is, like, I literally got rejected from all 3 of those. And here was someone saying, like, well, did you consider this path, or did you consider this type of role? And it was one of those cases where I actually shot a little bit too high. I maybe was overestimating my abilities. But it was someone telling me, like, no, it's you actually can do it, but here's a different direction, or you actually are qualified, but in this way. And so, yeah, I would just say, like, keep going. I would say, gosh, even like, don't be afraid to change the approach. Don't be afraid to like change the process. Don't be afraid to like get creative. When I got my job at Google, I don't necessarily recommend this because I get DMs all the time from people with random questions, but I just messaged someone who worked in learning and development, which is something I'm passionate about at Google, who came from an untraditional background. I'm like, do you have 15 minutes to chat? I sent that message to a few people. A bunch of people didn't respond. This guy finally did. We chatted. We hit it off. He sent me a referral at Google. That's the referral that ended up getting me the interview and the job. And there's a lot of context and story between there. But the point is, like, don't be afraid to change your strategy. Don't be afraid to like have an honest conversation with yourself. But at the end of the day, it's just like a grit game. So like, keep going, because that's the only, I don't know. I feel like that's the only option sometimes, is just like keep moving forward. I think I've done in my career, last thing I'll say is I made so many mistakes. I've even applying to jobs and like not knowing what I'm doing. But like the one thing I can hang my hat on is like, but I just like kept moving forward imperfectly, right? I kept moving forward imperfectly, which I feel like this is the story of job searching the last couple of years.
Everyone, by the way.
Everyone, right? Yeah. So
the story of anybody that's trying to do something good.
Right. There you go. Beyond recruiting, job searching, and dream jobs. It's like, that's life in general, right? So there you go.
Yeah. What's interesting what you're saying there is like the example you gave in Meta. I think like for me, the advice I would give all my clients, my job seeker clients, is like, if you get rejected, you've worked so hard, you made it this far, right? Don't burn the relationship by like ignoring it. Like say, hey, like let's say this is like a role play. Nicky, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure to meet you and the team. I totally understand that you guys are chosen. If for some reason anything changes, please consider me. And if there's any other role that you think my background fits better for, please send them my way. Because working at Google, this team, this technology, this whatever it is. And what's funny is that actually, so that's like a best practice for us to do. Every time you get rejected, never burn the bridge. Check in once a month, every 3 months, depending. Find a cadence that kind of works. And a client got rejected from Salesforce for a particular technical role. follow that kind of script reply, the guy said, hey, another manager in a different department who's a friend of mine, we're having lunch. He had a role that just opened up. Sounds like you have a similar background. Let me connect you with the recruiter of that role. Yep. A week later, he got skipped all the preliminary interviews, went directly to like the last hiring manager because he's already been culturally fit. Everything came within the Salesforce was there. The manager said, hey, I love him. I wanted to hire him, but just whatever, for a reason, find somebody better. 2-3 weeks later, he was being onboarded, background check, job, different role, similar level, right? And it's like any other person could have just never said, hey, thank you for your time, ignored the email, and it goes like that.
Totally. But, and just on that happens all the time. Stories like that, maybe not that exact situation or whatever, but like I could, if I had $1 for every time I heard a story like that, I'd have a lot of dollars, because it's like that's like the untraditional path I'm talking about is, and it may seem obvious, like, oh yeah, you send a follow-up, but like not a lot of people do that, or like people don't know these strategies, or like that's why career coaches exist. It's so it's case in point on that, because it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And it's very human. Sorry.
Go ahead.
It's a very humanistic approach, right? Like if you treat the interview as just transactional of whether I get a job or not, then you don't really send that thank you, keep me in mind type of email. And even Daniel, the way that you're saying it out loud, it just, that's the type of email that I love to get as a recruiter. And then I felt good about you and I would consider you more in the future. And so if you remember that your recruiter is human, they're going to remember that you're human who wants a job. So that was just my 2 cents there. But Daniel, go ahead.
I think that those little like tricks that you learn to trial and error, like the follow-up email and even how to get noticed, like those are the reason I think the power of like working with someone like a career coach that's been there, done that. But before we wrap it up, because time has flown and we're over 6 minutes of our traditional time, but this has just been such a great conversation. Nicky, would love for you to share, if people want to learn more about you, I know you have an amazing newsletter and you have an amazing LinkedIn that you're posting on a daily basis or really frequent basis. Can you tell us a little bit more about your newsletter and how people can learn more about the content and that you're sharing online?
Very kind. I would be happy to. Yeah, I started a bit of a passion project, a newsletter, as Daniel, you just alluded to, technicallyrecruiting.com, kind of a play on words. I'm a technical recruiter, and it's like technically recruiting. So very proud of that domain. But it's just technicallyrecruiting.com. Right now, it's a weekly newsletter, and I post on LinkedIn every weekday, usually. We just had our 3rd kid, so right now life is a little cuckoo bananas. But I post very regularly on LinkedIn, and what that newsletter does is the deeper dive into, honestly, yes, things that I find interesting, but I've done polls, I've messaged people in that, I have a couple thousand subscribers. And so I try to make it relevant to like, what do you want to know? Whether that's like a deep dive on resume reviews, whether that's like, here's what I look for in interviews, whether it's, strategies once you've been rejected. Honestly, some of the things we've talked about here, and just my experience as a technical recruiter and someone doing this for, 12 plus years. So again, it's a passion project of mine. I've really enjoyed it. That's what I'm pushing folks to. Yes, LinkedIn is great. And I have my newsletter all over my LinkedIn. So if you go there, you'll be able to find it. Just my name, Nicky Slavich, or technicallyrecruiting.com. It's been really fun seeing people respond. And I'm a newsletter junkie. I love responding to people more directly, one-on-one. And if it's not obvious, I'm an extrovert people person. So I love just like connecting with people more one-on-one and getting to know them. It's why I do what I do. So yes, the newsletter is great. And thank you both for having me. And again, starting with what I opened with, of if I talk for long enough, hopefully something in here is helpful. So feel free to, send folks my way. Daniel, there's follow-up, but this has been a lot of fun.
No, Nicky, this has been great. We'll put those links to your LinkedIn and your website newsletter on the show notes. And if you are listening to this and found value in it, don't forget to like and subscribe and share at least this episode with one friend. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nicky and Ellie. See you guys on the next episode. Bye.